So now we need to turn our attention to the panels. Now the panel is going to be 4 boards glued up, this is 2 of them here, and they're going to go on a wrap around the bottom. So in a sense, if this was the whole panel, this center section here will become the drawer fronts, and then this part here will wrap around to the left, and this part wrapping around to the right. But we're going to glue it up as one large panel, and you'll see why later when we get to that portion. Now these boards haven't been truly edge jointed, so there's a large gap going down the middle of the two, as you can clearly see. So what we need to do is we need to clean up that joint. Now at the beginning of the series I didn't have a power jointer. Now I have one, but it needs to be moved about 11 inches without a mobility kit to get to the plug, so I can't move 1,100 pounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how in the past I've done these type of glue ups, and actually it's a really good technique. It works really well on some long boards like this, and it's very fast once you get used to it. So it's a technique that comes out of solid surface industry, and what they do is they'll take the 2 pieces, they push them together like this, and the idea is that you're going to take a saw and you're going to cut right on that gap, but you're going to cut in such a way that the kerf is partially cutting on this board and partially cutting on this board. You're going to make sure that at all points there's a cut on both boards. Now when you do that, what will happen is that any little fluctuation in the blade or anything like that is going to be mirrored on one board to the other, so they're going to match. They're also going to work, say if this blade wasn't set to exactly 90 degrees, it could be set to 85 degrees for all you care, because the other one is going to be a complementary angle and it'll perfectly match. Very similar actually in effect to when you take 2 of the boards and then you fold them into your vise and you hit them with a hand plane. Any variation that you are off of 90 degrees is compensated for on the other board. This is the same idea here. So it's a really good technique, it's really fast to do. In my case I just use a sacrificial piece of MDF underneath. You're putting a guide rail on the first board, nudge it up close to the edge, then we're going to run the TS75 along the curve. Now also at the beginning of the series I didn't have the rip blade for this TS75, but I just picked up the Panther blade for it. It should be a much cleaner cut. It also works very well with the combination blade, which I've been using for years for it. So let's go ahead and go through these. I've got 4 boards to put together, so 3 joints, and then we should be good to go. One thing you'll want to do is when you line up these boards, because of the way that you're going to be mirroring any imperfection across, you're going to want to make sure that these are already lined up the way you want them to be glued. So if you have a cabinet maker's triangle on here, line that up before you do the cuts. Now let me bring you in a little bit closer so you can see what it looks like when we push them together. Nice clean joint. So now that all the boards have been edge jointed to match together, and again, this edge here may go cleanly with a different board, but it was made specifically to go with this edge, so that's going to be the best glue up option there. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go ahead and use the sacrificial board as a glue up medium. Since I have 4 boards, I'm going to glue up the bottom 2 and then the top 2 separately. So tonight I'll get those so they're going to be ready tomorrow to then be glued together. Doing all 4 at the same time is inviting a whole lot of cussing. So to keep the glue from gluing the panel down to the MDF, I'm just going to use some packing tape. It's pretty easy to know where the line is going to be. It's right where the kerf is. And even when the glue sticks to it, it really pops right off, so this stuff works well. Get some decent one though. I had some really cheap one before and it would just sit there and shred, and it was then you have to scrape it off, so that was no fun. So for this glue up, one of the things I find really handy, and you saw this earlier, is to use these wood clamps. So what I'm going to be doing is, because this is a really long board, I'm not going to be holding it up the whole time I'm trying to paint this glue on, is I'll just stand this up using the clamp basically to hold it up. I mean, the tactic works really, really well. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Put one on this side here so that they're not bumping into each other, and then lay out some glue and go fast. now it's time to get back to this project. I had an opportunity to go to Los Angeles for a nice 3-day weekend with just a ridiculous amount of woodworking going on in those 3 days, as well as some personal things going on. And because of that, I had to cram my usual 50-hour week at work into just 4 days. So it was crazy, and it got to the point where I actually watched the podcast that was this podcast here, edited up to this point in order to see what I was doing, so I knew where to pick up, because it's actually been sitting here for, I don't know, 7-8 days now. But time to get this into high gear, especially with the July 4th weekend coming up. I should get a lot of good progress going. So now it's time to turn the focus to wrapping this bottom segment. As you can see, the bottom segment is done, and I've already started to apply varnish to it, and I'm already applying the finish as well to the top segment, since basically these structures are done. We're going to be applying these panels to the outside, so they're going to be basically screwed in. Now, this only has a couple coats of General Finishes Armor Seal on it. I haven't done any sanding to the finish yet in between coats, so it's feeling a little bit rough. But I'll be able to take care of that in some downtime. Now, you saw that I did all the hand jointing on this large panel. I got this one surface flat, and it's going to be the surface that I'm going to put against this bottom segment to wrap it around. Now, the other side, it's mostly flat when I did the glue up. It could be flatter. Certainly, I would never use it as an outside surface if I was treating it as just a flat surface. But since we're going to be cutting a lot of it away initially, and then the rest of it's going to get sculpted, I really don't care if there's some small undulation somewhere. In fact, who knows, it might even add to the effect. Now, in the video you saw that I put a little bit of a chalk line over here. This one segment here, some of the ends of the boards had some nasty parts that wouldn't really level out. It wasn't worth jointing because this segment here is long enough to take care of wrapping around this bottom segment. Now, to figure out how much wood we're going to need for this bottom segment, it's pretty easy to do. There's only a couple things that we have to be careful about. The distance here, this is 19 inches to the back, but if you recall, it's being inserted into the top segment, so it's actually going to be offset away from the wall by 1.5 inches. So in that sense, we're going to need 20.5-inch panels on both sides. Now, the drawer front section is going to have to cover those panels. So pretend that this piece of ply is part of that panel. You're going to have end grained exposed here, and we're going to need this panel to come out all the way to cover those ends. Now, granted, a lot of this is going to be sculpted down. My intention is to get this down to about a nominal 1/4, 3/8 inch, but it's not going to be even. So we do have to make this panel go all the way out to the width. So we're going to have to add the thickness times 2. This is nominally 7/8 inch. It's pretty close to that everywhere. If there's a small discrepancy, it's going to be sanded away. So it's going to be 1.75 inches added to this width, and this width is 23.5 inches. So we're talking 25.25 inch panel, and we're just going to go, I'm going to go through and cut the 3 panels here on the MFT. As you can see, this MFT for cross-cutting such a large panel is fantastic, since all these benches are planar to each other. I'm just going to push it up against here, drop the rail, and make the cuts. So let's go. Step is going to be that I want to attach these panels to this bottom segment. This is only going to be temporary while I do the sculpting, because I want this side all attached with this piece, so that as I sculpt around the corner, I'm going to get this really nice matching, and it'll let me be a little bit more creative on this edge. I'd like the edge to have a little bit of an undulation with some bumps as it's going through to the other side, and that'll carry over onto the side panels. Now, the bottom segment, if you recall, is going to be inserted up into the top segment. So there's actually this 1.5 inch band up the top. A large part of it is going to be inserted in, and it won't have this panel on it. So in that sense, I've got about 1 inch space up here where I can drive some screws into the bottom segment, and then that'll hold it in place so that I can mark and sculpt everything right on this bottom segment as a whole. Now, the sculpting, of course, is pretty obvious, but when I mark this, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to take a router to pre-sculpt. Between the parts that are going to be higher up, I'm going to use a planing bit to lower it down to about 3/8 nominally everywhere, which is going to give me 2 reference surfaces, correct? It's going to give me this top portion here, and then the second portion is going to be the part where I leave it at about 3/8 inch thickness. and then the other parts are going to be sanded with the RAS and with the RO90 in order to create the pattern. So that's how we're going to go from here. I'm going to close this episode off here, so I'll have all that marked up and show you the markings on the next episode, and then we're actually going to do the pre-sculpting and the sanding. Let's get this thing going. Thanks, I'm Paul Marcel. Thanks for watching.